Welcome to the Siwike podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The Siwike podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with one of our guest hosts, Brian Yang, and we thought we'd have a conversation on how gaming helped you get a job. So, Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
Phenomenal as always. So as we were chatting about different topics to talk about, brainstorming and things like that, I often get comments from parents who are like, well, my kid games too much. They play too many games. It's not a good thing. But when we found this topic, we're like, well, actually gaming helped you get a job. I was curious and interested to say like, well, can we dive a little bit more and deeper in that? So I'd love if we started with a little bit more background on your stuff, and then how do we get from gaming help you get a job?
Yeah,
So tell the folks a little bit more about yourself and the background, the context.
So I'm Brian. My background is actually in engineering and mechanical engineering. I think at this point I have I tried multiple careers aspect in terms of what I want to do with my life. So there was mechanical engineering going first, tried academia in terms of trying to become a professor and really the teaching aspect of it. Went to do my master's and eventually wanted to transition to a PhD. But then halfway through that, I was like, I got pulled into sort of technology. Had this brilliant idea of trying to become the next Elon Musk and try to become the next Mark Zuckerberg. So started my own startup. Basically a project called Here, as in Listen Here. And then what we're trying to build is basically a communication platform to tell stories using anonymity as sort of its power and sort of background basis. And when that didn't go well, which is kind of the reason how this whole gaming world started, is where I kind of fell into a little bit of depression, really trying to go back and find myself. And then sort of the topic today is where I eventually went into the gaming space, really kind of put myself in it and sort of almost got lost in it. But what it did is kind of it raised a level of confidence level, and then from there I transitioned into sort of like, I guess, the real world industry in terms of consulting, and then I've been in consulting ever since then. So basically I am just a consultant in Deloitte Canada, here in Toronto. But that sort of journey of how transitioning into sort of like an entrepreneur into a consulting, gaming has always put a huge space in it.
Sounds good. So for those that kind of understood the subtext of it, it's really getting into depression, coming out of depression, and more on gaining confidence. So how can you gain your own confidence to find something that you're interested in getting into? So let's dive a little bit more. So you talked about engineering, you ultimately went to academia, but where the story really starts is kind of that platform that you were building here, and then landing into depression. Can you walk us through kind of that part of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the whole idea is that the idea of like why I went to start my own startup was that you had this kind of like vision, right? When you have this vision and you're so passionate about it, becomes something of almost like your child, and you really want to kind of bring that to life. I'm sure Lukey knows all about sort of this idea of trying to become your own boss, right? So the thing is, when I basically finished my master's, and the idea is to really kind of pursue technology into full force, that kind of becomes your life direction. So you kind of give up not necessarily what you've learned throughout entire, whether it's academia career, whether that's sort of mechanical engineering career, but you kind of you see that I don't really want to do those things anymore. I want to put all my eggs in one basket, and I want to push forward with that. So once you have this sort of energy and you feel that you can push so much, there was ideas like traveling to Iceland, traveling to like San Francisco, doing different pitch competitions, doing different business competitions, and we were somewhat successful at those. But at the end of the day, to have a successful startup, there is so much multiple facets that goes into it. Me being sort of like not the greatest product owner, not understanding sort of the agile methodology, not like still a very traditional way of thinking of how like doing engineering instead of doing sort of technical development. All those things sort of come into a factor. And then even in terms of how we get our co-founders in sort of that entire space, our co-founding team wasn't necessarily the strongest, so everything kind of crashing down, right? And so when you see the writing on the wall to say that this is the end, but it's just you kind of gave up your past education, your past experience. You have sort of this moment in life, so you question yourself, say, hey, like, what am I doing? Am I doing it right? Like, even if I move forward at this point, like, how do I know I'm making the right decisions? How do I know I am choosing the right opportunities? Because everything that I thought I was doing correctly ultimately crash and burn.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, what it does to, I think, at least for myself, is it really hinders your confidence, right? And I think that's such a key component in terms of making a decision, is how confident your ability to is for the end result. Now, that's a whole different topic with, like, result and process, or, like, the journey at the end. But sort of that when your confidence sort of breaks down, that's really, for me, was really hard to move forward, because it's like I can make decisions, but to me, it's like, what has changed since this failed startup to now, where I know, the similar idea flow process will result in a better way, right? Because I'll even kind of give an example. And look, I would actually love to hear your perspective on this. Is just like, during the whole startup scene, the idea is indecisiveness is the killer. So you just want to make a decision and you want to go forward with it. So one of the ways was like, we can even talk about the idea of spending money, right? So in a startup is that we want just to invest in ourselves. So even in the simple idea of, like, getting an incorporation, right? Getting a lawyer to help with getting incorporated, getting your charters right. That was like $5,000, right?
Okay.
From a business company, that's like, doesn't mean anything. But from a startup, which, like, absolutely, like, no funding, that's a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
So basically the idea is like, okay, we need incorporation. We need to get our co-founders charters right. $5,000, boom, that's done. Now, when your startup ends, that $5,000 that's just gone to waste, right? So even in terms of, like, thinking about how you spend money and how you want to invest in yourself, for me, it was like, okay, well, let's take a course, right? Let's get a certain certification. But these things cost like $2,000, cost $3,000, $5,000. And then what it does is that you're like, okay, well, does this really help me do what I want to do? Right. Or is this just another waste of money, like what I did in sort of like getting incorporated, right? So there's that sort of like almost blockage of you reminding yourself of the sort of their past failures and then not really able to move forward with that piece. And so that's the huge lack of confidence in terms of my ability to decision making. I don't know if that's something that you experienced in the previous times.
Yeah, I had almost the counterpart of it, where you talked about, like, indecisiveness being a killer. I was maybe too decisive, where I had this vision. So for those that know, I'm creating an app and building it, and I spent a boatload of money on it because I had this vision of what it was going to be. But I mean, I don't have unlimited money, so we could only build what we could build. So this is what I envisioned it. But it's like, well, if you want that, it's going to cost this much. But what we can build is this much. It's like, okay, fine, build it. If you build it, they will come. So the expression goes, right? So we built it. We still spent tens of thousands on that. And it was like, oh, I know everybody will want it, but then crickets, right? People weren't using it, wasn't useful. And it's like, okay, maybe I don't know exactly because I was approaching it in a slightly different way. So it was more similar but different in the sense that I had a sense of what I wanted to do. And I spent the money, so there was a decisiveness factor, but it wasn't really aligned with kind of what the market wanted. Whereas the approach that I'm taking right now is really building it, as you said, as a product owner, agile, iteratively to say, okay, what do you want? Let's take a look at this. What changes or updates would you want? And then build, and iterate. So that's kind of the new approach, which would have saved me a lot of money had I gone through that in there. So that's kind of my version of the story. It's slightly different, but on the same vein. But luckily, I didn't hit that kind of rock bottom where I went into confidence and depression. But I'd love if we kind of dive into that area and help people who are in that stuck where, like, you used to have this motivation where you want to kind of build this vision of the world, and now the writing's on the wall and you see it kind of crashing and burning in front of your face and like, oh my gosh, now what? What do I do? What are your thoughts on that?
So then basically when your confidence at all-time level, right, all-time low, you basically want to like you want to regain that, right? And that's sort of the piece, that's sort of the journey where you kind of take, where you start trying to things that make you feel different things. So for me, I've always been active. So I'm trying to go to the gym, I'm trying to interact with people, trying to playing basketball again, trying to start working out again. But it's like, there's the drive is not there. Like, you're not really wanting to see people at the gym. You don't really want to see people because of what you have already had this lack of confidence. You try yourself. I tried myself going to different networking events. I was like, you know what, maybe the startup failed, but let's go into sort of the entrepreneur space again, network with different people, hear other people's stories, and we get inspired out of that. That was not really working that well. So at this point, a lot of sort of the external side, I had was not really working, right? So you start looking at more of sort of like the independent stuff, and this is possibly sort of like a dark hole that you maybe don't want to go into, but somehow I got into it as well, right? So you start just watching shows, trying to do different things, etc. And I played a lot of different video games. Video games has always been a huge part of my life, whether that's playing like StarCraft when I was younger. Loki, that's a game that I know you enjoyed.
Yeah.
There was like Dota 2. That's something that was a lot about driving teamwork. And then one of the main video games that I played that I haven't really touched in a very long time was something called like World of Warcraft, right? I think hopefully the people who are listening are familiar with the game. But to give you a little bit of context in terms of World of Warcraft, it is a MMORPG, which is a massive online role-playing game. So basically, you are an individual character where you control an individual character, and you sort of just progress in this world, right? So you it's very much of like a metaverse sort of thing where like you are an individual character living in a different world. So because of sort of this identity, the really special thing about this game is that it basically you can show who you are as a person. You can show yourself and all your personas and all your characteristics without really revealing your background, without really revealing like who you are and what you do, etc., right? That protection of anonymity is so powerful, but no matter how anonymous it is, your identity, your persona will still show through your actions, through your verbiage, through the way that you play the game. So this was something that I've always I played this game back when I was like 12, 14 years old, and sort of during this whole entire depression cycle, I was like, I just want to feel something, right? I want to relive some of like the happy moments that I have. So the idea is to really kind of like, I was like, I just want to maybe just start this game up and feel some sort of nostalgia. That's it, right? And again, I think to put in perspective, the confidence was all-time low. My lack of decision was all-time low. There was no sort of drive to go forward. So I'm like, you know what? I just want to feel something. So let me play this game for the sake of nostalgia. So when I opened this game up, the like what I remembered once upon a time was no longer there. Everything was different. The people who I once played with, they all grew up, they all had kids, they all were married. People haven't logged on for years at a time, and like there was a 10-year gap between the last time I played and to like this time when I try to get out of depression, right? At this time, so then what do? So I was like, okay, well, I still just want to feel something. So you start reliving some of the past experiences. You run some through the dungeons. You run through some of the, the terrains. You see some of the experience. You do some player versus player action stuff. You're like, okay, this is kind of fun. This is kind of interesting. But then this is where sort of my sort of personality comes in. So I've always been someone who's very analytical. I've always been someone who's very competitive. Then even throughout this entire game, where you're like, when you're interested in it, and you can feel a sense of sort of like some sort of like tangle of sort of drive to go forward. I started doing more research about this game, right? I started doing watching different people play, learning about the different gaming system, gaming mechanics, watching different player perspective, and just started getting better and better at this game, right? And the big thing is I because the game is such a community-based game, and communication has always been such a key piece of it. And I would say I'm someone who I pride myself on being a very communicative person. that's where I can slowly see myself almost coming out of my shell, where I don't have to talk. I don't when I try to ask someone for help, I don't have to talk about, oh, this is my journey about being an engineer, about being an academia, or being an entrepreneur. We're both just playing the game. I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you help me out in this aspect of the game, right?
Right.
And of course, when you in this game, you're gonna get a lot of no's. You're gonna get a lot of saying like, "Hey, like you're such a noob. Like we don't want to help you, etc., etc." But then once in a while, you're gonna find some really good guy to kind of show you the ways of the game, and then you just start making that network, right? You start making this. You start expanding your network from absolutely nobody to know to have a few people on our friends list. We can play together. We can do dungeons together, and then eventually through also this network. I started to get into sort of more of a competitive guild, right? So basically, a guild is a team of people who do a basically curated content that the game provide, but basically on like a world ranking level, right?
Okay.
And basically throughout this entire time, I was more and more confident in myself, my ability at the game. I became better and better. There's a ranking system in the game that could obviously showcase that. And then what it does for the psyche is that it kind of shows you that I haven't lost my ways in terms of learning how to learn, right? The idea of looking at different resources and accumulating that and putting it back into the game, having multiple hours of practices, go out and reaching out to different people and really talking about how the game works, talking about different aspects of life, even trying to even the humanness of the players behind the gaming world, all those things kind of curated together, and I can see myself slowly progressing. So then once I got into this sort of this competitive guild, I slowly became more and more of a core member, being more engaged in the community, helping more of the newer folks, quote unquote carrying people for more of the lower content. So I became a quote unquote a core member of this US top 300 team that was playing in World of Warcraft. And what that does to the psyche is that if I kind of summarize this entire journey, I think this was a span of 4 months. It was I went from someone who was a complete novice at the game, who had no network, who had no friends to play this game, in a game which it is solely driven by community, to someone who is now a solid member of a community, of a highly competitive team as well. And that entire process entailed me kind of reaching deep down in myself and bring that sort of inner Brian out, right? So still trusting my ability to be analytical, still trusting my ability to be competitive, and lastly is trusting my ability to be personable and be human to other people and having that communication skill. So basically this entire game, what it did is it brought out it reminded myself of a confidence that I basically lost in the previous time. And it basically showcased that this process of you just have to believe, you have to bet on yourself, and you have to remind yourself that all those years of tackling different professions, all the soft skills that you learn, they haven't lost, right? You had a stumble, and yes, that could be a combination of so much thing else, but some skills that you have, still keep those and keep driving forward. So because of that specific sort of I guess just drive, that's when the idea of okay, well, let's start back, let's take all of these lessons that I learned in this game and let's push it into the real world, right? Because Luki, something that you preach so much is about networking, right?
Sure.
And networking becomes so huge, but for me, I couldn't do it because there was a lack of confidence, right? So then at this point, when this confidence kind of rebuild up, I'm like, okay, let's buy a ticket to a different city. So that was from Calgary to Toronto, and just apply the same principle. I just want to go to the city. Do I want to get a job? I don't know. Do I want to do I want to go back to school? I don't know. Do I want to start a company again? I don't know. But what I do know is that I'm going to a new city. I'm going to be analytical. I'm going to be competitive, and I'm going to network and and just kind of apply the same principles and see what I get. And basically, to kind of wrap this story up in a quick fold is throughout this entire time when I went to Toronto, I just applied the same thing. Was analytical in terms of being in terms of like writing stories, in terms of learning code, etc., etc. Was competitive with nobody but myself, just to see that am I doing better than the week that I was doing previously? Am I learning more? Am I progressing more? And the last thing was just networking. I had a lot of different friends to connect me with, mentors, with coaches, with different senior managers at different consulting firms. And when I told the story to literally everybody who I kind of interact with, the one person who gave me the opportunity was a senior manager at Deloitte to say like, hey, your story of like gaming is interesting. Let me give you a shot at it. And that's basically how I landed the job at Deloitte.
That's amazing, and landing a job through gaming, no less. And what I took from that conversation, there's a whole bunch of different areas where the interesting part was that journey seemed to me more of like a journey in kind of self-exploration, right? So you went back to that your roots, that nostalgia. It's like, you know what, I can do this, and I think that competitive nature really helped with that progressing. Part of what I did on my side was more on the reflection. So I wouldn't say that I'm a competitive person, but at the same time, I became like a reflective person where I thought like, how could I improve? How could I get better? That was a little bit later in my career. But from there is wanting to progress and figure out, you know what? I don't have to be the stereotypical computer scientist, shy, introverted person. I can network, right? And I didn't start by going into like a big networking conference where I had to meet people. I just started by talking to someone beside me. And then I would talk to people like on the bus, right? In line and stuff like that. So small little challenges that incrementally, but to your point in the gaming world, I slowly built my confidence there. And she's like, you know what? I don't mind talking to people. I can actually have that. Now, I don't like talking to everybody in every context, but so I kind of honed myself in which context, in what areas do I like having those conversations and build up my confidence there. And then trying to improve as well. And then when you have that improvement, you can see that progress. You start building that confidence and it improves. And that doesn't mean you won't slide back a little bit once in a while. Let's say, oh, why did I do that? I kind of screwed up there. But eventually you say, you know what, let me pick myself up and go. And one interesting part is the fact that it was in the span of 4 months, right? Like, so there are some like top tier competitive games where it's almost like playing in the NBA or the NHL, right? You have to have probably some talented, gifted. Some of them started when they're like 10 years old. But the fact that this one was driven by community. So there's so many areas of the world where immersing yourself with people, like-minded folks, and getting understanding. And I think one of the core skills that you mentioned is being able to ask for help. I think that is such a core skill to be able to say like, hey, I'm a noob. I admit it. could we help? And someone probably carried you just like you decide to carry other folks. And that's another part where like just kind of acknowledge the help that you had along the way and kind of pay that back, pay that forward or whatever it is. I think there's so many different life lessons, which is interesting to be able to see from the world of gaming. But I think all that comes from that little bit of reflectiveness, thinking about how can I improve, how can I get better, and then probably that link to say, okay, let me take this decision and move forward. And I don't know if you can kind of go back to that moment to say like, okay, let me go and buy this ticket to Toronto and immerse myself. Like, how did that decision come about, or how did you kind of make that transition?
For sure. So actually, before you even answer that question, I actually want to jump into I wanted to kind of reflect on what you said, right? In terms of that idea of like that, you were this introvert, and then eventually, you can't just jump into the straight of this networking event. You have to go small steps in terms of like talking to people on the bus, just making small talks back and forth, etc., etc. Because I love that progressiveness in terms of like networking, right? Because I think a lot of people, when they think about networking, it's like a 0 or 1. Right. Whether I am not networking at all, where I'm going to these, events and just talking to people. Right. And I think there's such a spectrum in between from that, where you have to feel like ability to be comfortable with yourself. Right. Something that I was talking to another person was like, for you to get out of depression, you need to see people. Right. But it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of strength to go from you don't want to see anybody to go face the world, right? That's 0 to 1. Like, some people not have the strength where you don't even have the courage to do that, and that's like that shouldn't be sort of looked down upon on, right? So you basically you apply that sort of like incremental steps, and which is like a huge piece of which I felt like gaming was a core factor of it, was that gaming was sort of this idea of, was this middleman where like it's not zero because you're talking to different people, right? But it's not one because you actually get to hide your face, you get to hide your identity, right? But this middle ground is that idea of like you get to still show who you are as an individual. Your persona still comes in. So that middle space, like it's like for people who are not necessarily the great networks, who are not necessarily the great talkers, like don't have to think about, again, going from absolute like I'm not really good at public speaking to let me go speaking to the middle of Madison Square Garden and let's kind of wow the crowd, right? There's so many intermediate steps going between. I love the idea of talking to people on the bus. I love the idea of like for me it was going to different sporting events, whether that's intramural, whether that's like a book club, something that like a third party sort of like hobby that gives you almost a topic to talk about, right? Book club is always a great place to do it in. Then you get to meet the friends, there's like environmental clubs and stuff like that. So those are the things that I absolutely love. Maybe I just want to throw the question back at you, Luki. Like, did you have any sort of like those small intermediate steps that like were you in a club or something like that? Were you in or did you just like start forcing yourself to start talking to people like out in the streets?
Yeah, I mean, when I reflect back at it, like what I've been sharing with a lot of folks is I find that choice is really your ultimate superpower, right? Once you make that choice, then things start falling into place. Now, it doesn't mean that choice, now I need to be like a TEDx speaker or something. It's like choice. Now I should go out and talk to someone. That was it. So for me, it was late in my university career where I realized, you know what, I am the shy, introverted kid, but I'm making a choice to improve myself and not be that way, right? To get a little bit better. And I had was probably into a bunch of like personal professional development stuff and like every expert starts as a beginner, that sort of thing. So I realized that first conversation, I knew it wasn't going to be good, right? But I decided to do it anyway and then just kind of incrementally improve. And now that this conversation that I went through, I know it wasn't good. How could I do better? And then better and better and better and there, right? So for me, it was, there was a club. I actually joined a badminton club in my final year at university. And I like, people liked me. I had a different persona in this club versus my past life. So it was almost my version of the video game where like I didn't have all the baggage and history of Luki's kind of shy, introverted, and first, second, third year, you never even heard of him or whatever. But now it's like, oh, Luki seems interesting. He's decent at badminton, that sort of thing. We want to play with him. I don't mind being his doubles partner and things like that, right? So that was kind of my sort of version of that. But what I chalk that up to is, again, that decision, right? Small, huge, or whatever. As long as you make a decision and the choice to move forward and improve, and then ideally further that decision, where the next one you improve. I think that to me would be the key. But I'd love to kind of start wrapping up this conversation because there's so much more that we could dive into in terms of like building confidence, overcoming depression, and things like that, right? So and landing jobs and things like that. But for folks there, I think some of the core messages out there are really making that choice, right? Who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to be seen? And if you can't do that right in the real world, start in a game. Start in a club, start in a whatever, right? And from there, try to find your own voice because you might want to be some way, but you realize, well, that's not actually me. And then you might adjust that and then try a different game, try a different club or whatever and see what fits and then move forward and progress in that way. So what are your thoughts and reactions to that?
No, absolutely love it. I think the idea of like I think choice is absolutely amazing, and I think that the choice that you have to even kind of like give you out is like that choice of being incremental instead of being 0 to 100, being like a little more progressive, to the whole idea of like the choosing to go to Toronto. That's one of those conscious choices, right? Where it's like, okay, I've learned stuff here in whatever world that it is. Let me extract those aspects and extract those traits, and let me apply them to different things and see are those traits tangible, right? And that sort of consciousness of choice moving forward was something that ultimately kind of pulled me out of depression, and then sort of like land something land a pretty interesting role here in Toronto. So that's it. So basically, absolutely, I can echo exactly what you just said. I'm 100% with it. You know, when you want to push yourself so hard towards one specific area, like especially your career, sometimes it's actually good to just take a step back and be better and better yourself in other aspects, right? Whether that's gaming, whether that's badminton, whether that's fitness, whether that's book club, whatever it is. And you can see those tangible traits kind of like come in and come out.
Yeah, and definitely, and this episode is less about gaming specifically and how like the mechanics of it develop your skills, but how going and using something like a game where you make progress, you level up, you grow and all that. Well, consider that for yourself, whether it's the context of a game, a book club, badminton, or whatever it is that you're doing. Show that progress, and oftentimes some of the underscoring to that is also the community and the network that you connect with is very helpful. So finding that supportive community that accepts you for who you are and allows you to kind of be the version of you. So as you're exploring that, and then seeing and realizing that, okay, you have these skills, whether you acknowledge them or not, maybe you have other people that help you see those skills and move forward with them. And for me, the takeaway that I had at the end of the day is making that choice. Right. So at any point in time, it's always a choice either to go into depression or to go out of depression. Right. One of the two, and then move forward and to move to Toronto or not, to have a conversation or not. Right. It's always a choice. Now, it could be the incremental ones, or it could be something as big as like buying a plane ticket and moving halfway across the country.
Absolutely.
That's not an incremental choice. That's a huge choice. But pick kind of the preferences and the style that you have and move forward with that. So
absolutely.
Hopefully folks can find kind of parallels to their own life. And are there any kind of parting words of wisdom that you'd want to share with folks before we close off, Brian?
No, like I think you absolutely capped it off. You know, have choices in your life, and have choices in your life in terms of taking baby steps and not looking too much into the future. I would say like I think if anything, the idea of confidence. I was there at once where confidence is it becomes shattered. The idea is to just look back in your life and see what you did well. You have succeeded at times in your life, and those successes will carry on. If you ever failed, we all fail in life, and that hurts, and that will always hurt. It still hurts to me to today. But there's a sense of believing in yourself. You have what it takes to kind of be the best version of yourself, and just kind of keep on going forward.
Sounds good. And I would want to actually play a little devil's advocate to that, to say where I have a quote that I often cite. It's, for there is nothing good or bad, and thinking makes it so. So whatever happened to you that hurts, what if that was the best thing that could have ever happened to you? Right? And if you change that perspective, that's a different choice again, and hopefully that can lead you on to a different path. But
absolutely,
thanks so much, Brian, for engaging in this conversation. And we started with how gaming got you in a job, and we moved over into kind of building confidence and to choice, and basically progressing to become the best version of yourself. So thanks so much, Brian, for joining us in the conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
Absolutely.
Take care, Brian.
Thanks for joining us on the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.